All right, let's dive into something that's both fascinating and a little mind-bending. We're talking about the Nephilim, these giant figures from ancient history that have sparked debates and theories for ages. You've got stories of these massive beings who were said to walk the earth, build incredible cities, and just generally do things that seem almost mythical. Now, what's wild is that you find references to these giants in texts like the Book of Enoch and the Bible. They're described as the offspring of sons of God and daughters of men. Sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, right? But here's the kicker. Were they real? Did they exist? Or are they just tales spun from ancient imaginations? As we explore this topic, we're going to check out some incredible sites like Baalbek and Jericho, cities that might have connections to these giants. The architecture there raises so many questions about what people were capable of back then. Were they using advanced technology? Or were these giants the ones pulling the strings? So, join me on this journey. We're going to peel back the layers of myth and reality, examining the remnants of a time when these stories were not just tales, but potentially rooted in history. What's the real story behind the Nephilim? Let's find out. Hey there, if you love content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. We've got plenty more coming your way. You've got to admit, there's something intriguing about the idea of giant beings walking among us in ancient times. From the Greeks and their titans to the biblical Nephilim, giants seem to be a universal theme in human storytelling. Think about it. Ancient civilizations weren't just spinning tales for entertainment. These stories were woven into their cultures, reflecting their fears, their hopes, and their understanding of the world. When you read through these ancient texts, you can't help but wonder, were these giants real? Did they represent something bigger, like the struggle against nature or the unknown? In many myths, giants are depicted as powerful, sometimes benevolent, but often terrifying. They build massive structures, wield incredible strength, and often play pivotal roles in creation myths or battles between gods and men. It's fascinating how these stories served as a way to explain natural phenomena, victories, and defeats. And what about the physical evidence? Some archaeological sites are so massive that they make you question how human beings could have constructed them without some help, or maybe something more than human. The very existence of these stories raises so many questions about our history and what we might have forgotten. Let's dig into that. Nephilim, these enigmatic figures that have captured imaginations for centuries. Picture this. Massive beings that some say were born from the union of divine sons of God and human daughters of men. We're not just talking about a couple of tall folks here. We're talking about giants, beings of immense power that were said to walk the earth. The biblical references paint a wild picture. These guys weren't just your average humans. They were legendary warriors, possessing strength and abilities that seemed almost superhuman. They were described as mighty and feared, dominating the landscape in ways that challenge our understanding of what's possible. Imagine a time when these beings roamed the land, leaving behind stories that would echo through the ages. What's particularly intriguing is the ambiguity surrounding them. Some texts portray them as fallen angels, while others present them as tragic figures caught in the chaos of a world on the brink of destruction. It makes you wonder, were they protect destroyers or something in between? This duality adds to their mystery and raises a ton of questions about their true nature. Now, let's take a look at Genesis 6 verses 1 to 4, which gives us our first detailed glimpse of the Nephilim. This passage introduces the sons of God and daughters of men, and suggests an extraordinary mingling of divine beings and humanity. Who exactly are these sons of God? Some argue they were fallen angels, celestial beings leaving their divine post, while others believe they represent the righteous lineage of Seth mixing with the wicked line of Cain. Regardless of which side you take, this notion of a blending of realms sets the stage for a wild narrative. The text goes on to state that their union produced the Nephilim, these mighty men of renown, giants who were said to be physically imposing and powerful. You can't help but think about the implications. If these beings truly existed, what kind of impact did they have on ancient societies? How did their presence influence the world around them? Context is key here, especially since these events occur just before the Great Flood. It's a time of moral decay, and the Nephilim are intertwined with the darker themes of corruption and chaos. Their existence serves as a warning, suggesting the dangers of crossing divine boundaries and the consequences of a world spiraling out of control. Now, let's turn our attention to one of the most fascinating apocryphal texts out there, the Book of Enoch. This ancient scripture expands on the Genesis narrative and provides some of the most detailed descriptions of Nephilim. Specifically, in 1 Enoch 6-7, we see how the Watchers, a group of angels, descend to earth and take human wives, leading to the birth of the Nephilim. The text vividly describes these giants as being great giants whose height was 3,000 cubits. That's about 4,500 feet. Imagine that. The Book of Enoch portrays the Nephilim as monstrous beings who wreak havoc on humanity, with their actions described as brutal and destructive. In 1 Enoch says, "They began to sin against birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish, and to devour one another's flesh." It's a clear indication that their existence leads to chaos and violence, corrupting mankind. What's particularly compelling is how this text digs into the moral ramifications of their existence. The Watchers, in their desire to interact with humans, create a race that ultimately contributes to the downfall of civilization. In 1 Enoch 10, God commands the archangels to bind the Watchers and send them to the abyss as punishment for their transgressions. This leads to God's decision to cleanse the earth with the Great Flood. The Book of Enoch emphasizes that the power these beings possess comes with a hefty price, one that humanity must pay. Alright, so let's talk about how these ancient texts about giants, especially the Nephilim, left a footprint on cultures around the world. Think about it. Stories of giants didn't just fade away after these books were written. Instead, they exploded across generations, influencing beliefs, traditions, even artwork and folklore in some pretty incredible ways. In the Middle Ages, for instance, you've got folklore across Europe that's filled with tales of giants building mountains, forming rivers, and laying the foundations of ancient monuments. There's this idea that anything grand or mysterious was too big for regular humans to have created. Just look at the legends around Stonehenge or the Giant's Causeway. People wanted to believe that giants, with their superhuman power, shaped the very land they lived on. In Scandinavian mythology, we see giants portrayed as massive, ancient beings who once roamed the earth alongside gods and monsters. It's like this idea of giants was so universally compelling that it crossed boundaries, religions, and cultures. Even in Central America, you've got stories of giant beings within the Aztec and Mayan civilizations who were considered ancestors of the human race, often portrayed as fallen heroes or godlike beings. And then there's the influence of these stories on modern traditions and even conspiracy theories. You've got people today who think giants were real, that they existed in ancient times, and that evidence of them has been hidden away. I mean, just look at how many YouTube videos and articles are out there linking giants to massive skeletons supposedly found across the globe. These stories have evolved, but kept their grip on our imaginations. So, when you break it down, these ancient texts did more than just give us stories. They planted seeds of fascination with giants that grew into entire legends, myths, and even modern-day beliefs. It makes you wonder, why are we so drawn to this idea of beings larger than life? How many of these stories are myths, and how much might just be some kind of lost memory? It's incredible how these ideas about giants have managed to stay relevant, keeping people hooked on the mystery to this day. Here comes the most mysterious aspects of the Nephilim. What happened to them after the flood? This is where things get really interesting because the flood narrative itself, this massive, world-resetting event, is central to almost every ancient culture. From the biblical account to Sumerian, Babylonian, and even Native American traditions, we see stories of this catastrophic flood that was meant to cleanse the earth. And it wasn't just a myth, it was a line in the sand between two worlds, and the Nephilim are right there in the thick of it. In the Bible, Genesis 6 sets the stage for the flood by describing a world corrupted by the Nephilim and the actions of the sons of God. It's like humanity and these godlike beings, or possibly fallen angels, had crossed a boundary, leading to widespread violence and chaos. God's decision to flood the earth was like hitting the reset button to wipe out the corruption, including the Nephilim. But here's where things get wild. Despite the supposed cleansing, there are still mentions of giants in later biblical texts, like the giants in the land that the Israelites encountered in Canaan. So what happened? Some people think there was a second incursion, a second wave of giants that somehow appeared after the flood. Others argue that the Nephilim survived the flood, maybe because some of them escaped, or because the flood wasn't truly worldwide. It's like, did they slip through the cracks? Or are we looking at a recurring pattern, where these beings keep finding a way back into our world? And here's the kicker. Flood stories appear in civilizations across the globe, each with its own twist. The Sumerians, with their tale of Ziusidra, and the Babylonians with Utnapishtim, also talk about gods and semi-divine beings who get wiped out in a flood. Even the Hopi and the Maya have versions where ancient giants face judgment. These cultures all carry echoes of a pre-flood world where giants, or powerful beings, roamed the earth, and a post-flood world where humanity had to start fresh, possibly in the shadow of these ancient beings. When we start asking whether the Nephilim made it past the flood, we're also tapping into questions about how history and mythology intersect. Are we talking about literal beings, or are they symbols of a lost age? Some ancient texts, like the Book of Jubilees, suggest that a handful of Nephilim spirits survived in a different form, becoming dark entities that haunted humanity afterward. And you gotta ask, was the flood really as final as we think? Because if there's one thing that seems clear, it's that the legends of giants didn't stop with the flood. They transformed, they adapted, and in some ways they thrived. We've already touched on the Nephilim dwelling in the book of Genesis and the book of Enoch. But these ancient stories about giants don't stop there. One of the standout mentions comes in Numbers 13:33. Here, we've got the story of the Israelites, led by Moses, who sends spies into the land of Canaan to scope things out. And what do they report back? They say, "We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." They're describing the Anakim, these terrifyingly large beings, almost superhuman in stature. The text paints a picture of people who were more than just big. They were monumental. The Anakim were said to inhabit Canaan, specifically around Hebron, and they were so powerful and intimidating that the spies felt dwarfed just by being near them. And it wasn't just a couple of people saying this. The text makes it clear that all 12 spies were spooked. What's really wild here is how the Anakim are directly tied back to the Nephilim, as if they're descendants or another incarnation of these ancient giants. So, even after the flood, we're still seeing these stories of giants who are out there, living among humans in the promised land. This is where the Bible's narrative feels almost mythic, like something out of an epic where humans have to face these larger-than-life beings. And it's not just the Bible that talks about these giants. When we start looking at apocryphal texts and literature from other ancient cultures, we see that giants, huge, powerful beings, are a recurring theme across the ancient world. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known stories, we meet Gilgamesh himself, a king who's described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, towering over others with unmatched strength. He's not labeled as a giant in the strict sense, but he shares that same archetype, a powerful figure, closer to gods than to regular humans. Then you've got figures like Humbaba, the monstrous guardian of the cedar forest in Mesopotamian myth, who's described as being of immense size and strength. He's another figure that seems to fall into this category of giants or godlike being standing apart from humanity. And if we look at Greek mythology, we see the Titans, the primordial giants who waged war against the Olympian gods. These weren't just powerful humans. They were forces of nature, often representing raw power, chaos, and the dangers of challenging the divine. These stories seem to speak to something deep in the human psyche, this fascination with beings that are other, larger, and more powerful than we are, yet somehow deeply connected to our world. It's like ancient cultures saw giants as a way to explain forces they couldn't control or understand. The Anakim, the Titans, the heroes in Mesopotamian myths, they all serve as reminders of a time when humans felt that they were living alongside beings who represented something beyond human experience, forces too big to comprehend fully. What do other cultures say about Nephilim? Giants who used to exist in the ancient Near East. When we talk about ancient giants or demigods, it's easy to think they're isolated to just one culture or religious text. But the more you dig, the more you realize that stories of powerful, part divine beings show up in the ancient Near East. Take the Apkallu from Sumerian mythology, for example. These beings were described as demigods, part divine and part human, often shown as wise, fish-like figures who descended from the heavens to bring knowledge and guidance to humanity. Sound familiar? The Apkallu were advisors to the early kings of Sumer, seen as culture bringers, almost like ancient scientists or sages. Their role was to teach humans the arts of civilization, agriculture, writing, law, and even magic. But they weren't just wise men. They were powerful and intimidating. Some legends say they had the knowledge of the gods themselves. And get this, the Sumerians believed that these beings were so important that they made them guardians over humanity, part of this cosmic order that kept the universe in balance. Now, if we zoom out a bit, it's not hard to see some clear parallels between the Apkallu and the Nephilim. Both were beings of immense knowledge and power, and both are described as part human, part divine. The Apkallu were revered, even worshipped, while the Nephilim were seen as more chaotic, a blend of divine and earthly forces that created a kind of imbalance. But the essence is similar. We're looking at ancient people wrestling with the idea of divine power interacting with human life, with beings who blur the lines between gods and men. What's really interesting is that in later Sumerian and Akkadian texts, you start seeing references to corrupted Apkallu after the flood. These post-flood Apkallu are viewed differently, almost as spirits or demon-like beings that haunt humanity. In this way, the Apkallu went from being revered teachers to something darker, even dangerous. And this transition echoes the way Nephilim are sometimes depicted, not just as giants, but as fallen beings, powerful, but somehow outside the boundaries of what's acceptable or safe. And here's the kicker. These aren't the only other cultural stories about demigods or giants. So what does this mean for our understanding of the Nephilim? It suggests that these stories might not be isolated accounts. Instead, they could be part of a shared cultural memory across the ancient Near East. We've got Sumerians, Akkadians, and Hebrews all grappling with the same question. What happens when divine beings interact with humans? And what kind of power and danger do these interactions bring? The Greek titans and giants. Let's broaden the scope a bit. We've been digging into the Nephilim, these mysterious beings from the ancient Near East, right? But here's the thing. If you start looking around, you realize stories about giants, superhuman beings, and city builders aren't unique to just one culture. Let's head over to ancient Greece, where they had their own take on the whole giants among men thing. And they didn't just stop at big humans. They gave us titans and giants, legendary beings who played god-sized roles in the world's creation and destruction. First, the Titans. Greek mythology says that before the Olympian gods, before Zeus, Hera, and all those folks, there were the Titans. They were primordial beings, children of the sky god Uranus and the earth goddess Gaia. The Titans weren't just strong. They were cosmic forces with power that shaped the heavens, the earth, and everything in between. They were the first rulers of the cosmos, holding dominion over the natural order itself. Imagine being so colossal and powerful that they made the gods we're familiar with seem like newcomers. In some ways, they remind us of the Nephilim, not just because of their size and power, but because they represent that clash between the old order and a new way of things. The Titans were literally overthrown by their own descendants, the Olympians. Just like the Nephilim are said to have been overthrown or cast aside in ancient lore. Then we have the giants in Greek myth, and these guys were wild. The Greeks had this concept of a gigantomachy, a great mythical battle where the Olympian gods fought against a race of giants. The giants weren't just any creatures. They were born from Gaia, Mother Earth herself, and they were warriors with strength beyond anything humans could imagine. We're talking about beings that could pick up mountains, tear apart landscapes, and hold their ground against gods like Zeus and Athena. There's even this famous myth about a giant named Enceladus who supposedly tried to climb Mount Olympus to overthrow the gods. They were fierce, chaotic, and incredibly powerful, kind of like how the Nephilim were depicted. But here's where things get even more interesting. When you start comparing the Greek stories to the stories we have of the Nephilim, you start seeing some serious similarities. Both the Titans and the Nephilim were said to have come from unions that bridged the divine and human realms. With the Nephilim, you've got the sons of God mingling with the daughters of men, and boom, you get these giants who walk the earth. In Greek mythology, the Titans were also part divine and part of the earth, and their children, the giants, were almost like the Greek version of Nephilim. They were seen as these powerful, sometimes misunderstood beings who straddled the line between worlds, embodying the old ways but also stirring up massive conflict with the new gods. Both mythologies portray these beings as architects of chaos and order. The Titans shaped the world itself, while the giants tried to overthrow the gods to rule over humankind. And the Nephilim, in some versions of the story, they were warriors and builders, beings with knowledge and power that made them larger than life, literally and figuratively. These myths didn't just serve as bedtime stories. They were deeply rooted in the cultures that told them, shaping people's understanding of the world and the forces that control it. Let's also think about the symbolism here. The Titans and giants in Greek mythology, much like the Nephilim in ancient texts, often symbolize that blurred line between what's divine and what's human. It's like these ancient cultures were wrestling with big questions about power, morality, and the nature of existence. What happens when divine beings mix with humans? Do we get heroes? Monsters? Beings that walk the earth with enough power to build cities and shape nations? And who gets to be in charge? These myths make you wonder if there's a kernel of truth somewhere, a lost history where beings of unimaginable power once left their mark on our world. North American legends of giants. North America has its own mind-blowing legends of giants, and the stories here aren't just wild tales. They're wrapped in tradition, deep cultural history, and get this, even some compelling physical evidence that has kept people scratching their heads for generations. First, we're talking Native American cultures. There are tribes all over North America, like the Paiute, the Sioux, and the Navajo, who tell stories about massive beings who once roamed the continent. These weren't just tall humans. They were giants, beings with incredible strength and sometimes otherworldly traits. The Paiute, for instance, tells a tale about the Sitesich, a tribe of red-haired giants who they say are hostile, cannibalistic, and terrifyingly powerful. According to legend, these giants and the Paiute people clashed in fierce battles, and in one of the stories, the Paiute even drove the giants into a cave and burned them out to end their reign of terror. But here's the kicker. This story isn't just a loose myth. Archaeologists actually discovered Lovelock Cave in Nevada, and when they went in there, they found artifacts, tools, and even human-like remains that were, well, on the bigger side. Now, it's debated, but it's intriguing to think that there could be physical evidence tied to these tales. Did a race of large, red-haired people once roam the land? Were they giants, or just some tribe with unique physical characteristics that grew into the myth we know today? This is one of those questions that sits in that fuzzy zone between fact and folklore, which makes it all the more fascinating. Native American lore also tells of these beings as creators or builders of ancient sites. You hear about burial mounds in places like Ohio and the Mississippi Valley, and the legends claim they were constructed by a race of giants. Archaeologists have studied these mounds and can tell us quite a bit about their age and purpose, but there's still debate about who originally built them. Some early reports from the 19th century even described unusually large skeletons being found in these mounds. I know it sounds like something straight out of an adventure story, but it's true. These reports, from towns like Chillicothe, Ohio, spoke of bones that were almost twice the size of a typical human skeleton. While modern archaeologists might be more skeptical of these reports, you've got to wonder, were these just tall tales, or is there a grain of truth buried in these old accounts? Then in the Great Lakes region, the Ojibwe tell stories of giants they called Wendigos. Although they're sometimes depicted as monstrous, cannibalistic beings rather than just oversized humans. But here's the interesting twist. Wendigo stories vary across tribes, and in some versions, they're these enormous, ancient beings that are tied to the land itself. It's almost like these giants aren't just figures from mythology. They're embodiments of nature's wild, untamable side. And maybe that's the core of these legends. Giants representing the awe and fear of a landscape so vast, it seems like only beings larger than life could ever conquer it. Now, we could look at these legends as pure folklore, right? But the thing is, there's an odd pattern here. So many native tribes, who didn't always communicate with each other, have stories of giants. And sometimes, those stories overlap with archaeological finds that make you pause. Take the giant's tomb on an island in Lake Huron, Canada. Local legends say it's the resting place of an ancient giant, and the site does contain unusual rock formations that don't seem to fit with typical burial practices. While no skeletons have been confirmed, the site feeds that human itch to explore, to ask questions, to wonder what might have come before us. And it's not just skeletons or burial mounds. The rock art and carvings left behind by ancient cultures depict figures that could be interpreted as giants or, at the very least, powerful beings of extraordinary stature. In some petroglyphs, you see larger-than-life figures towering over others, symbols of strength or dominance. It's as if they were depicting beings so powerful, they needed to be immortalized in stone. Some might say this is just symbolic, but given how many of these legends emphasize the physical size of these beings, it does make you think, were they depicting something they had actually seen, or was it a way to honor mythological heroes from the past? And look, at the end of the day, these stories from Native American cultures are deeply respected and carry a lot of cultural significance. They're not just spooky campfire tales. They're rooted in a worldview that sees the world as alive with spirits, forces, and entities that we might not understand. So when we hear stories about giants, it's a blend of history, spirituality, and human curiosity. And as for the archaeology, the fact that some of these sites, some of these mounds, and even a few skeletons seem to hint at something unusual, it makes you wonder if we're looking at remnants of a time when giants, literal or symbolic, walked the earth. African and Asian legends of giant builders. Now, let's take a trip around the globe and dive into some fascinating giant myths from Africa and Asia. It's wild how many cultures, separated by oceans and mountains, tell similar stories about colossal beings that shape their worlds. You've got to wonder, what's going on here? Is it just coincidence? Or is there a deeper connection in human history that we're still trying to unravel? In Africa, the legends are as diverse as the continent itself. In various cultures, there are tales of giants who were said to be responsible for some of the monumental structures we see today. Take the Zulu and their stories about the Ngwenya, which translates to the crocodile, but refers to giant beings capable of reshaping the landscape. The Zulu believed these giants built sacred mountains and altered rivers, creating the geography we see. This isn't just a myth. It's a way for them to explain the seemingly unexplainable. How do you account for massive mountains and valleys? Simple. Giants did it. And then there's the fascinating story of the Great Zimbabwe ruins. This architectural marvel has been a subject of debate among historians and archaeologists. Some legends speak of a race of giant builders who constructed these walls, raising questions about who the real builders were. The stone structures, with their intricate design and impressive height, have led to theories about the advanced knowledge of those who constructed them. But what if there's more to it? What if these giants are part of a narrative that has been lost to time, a way to connect the present with a mystical past? Now, let's switch gears and head over to Asia, where giant legends are as rich as they are varied. In Hindu mythology, you've got the Asuras, beings of enormous size and power, often seen as both creators and destroyers. They were considered capable of crafting grand structures, and in the epic Mahabharata, there are tales of these giants creating celestial palaces that left humans in awe. The construction of these structures is sometimes attributed to divine beings, and that's where it gets interesting. Was this a metaphor for human achievements, or did these giants actually walk the earth and shape our history? In Japan, The stories take a turn with the Joragumo, a creature that can shapeshift into a beautiful woman, but also has the power to control enormous spiders. While not giants in the traditional sense, these beings highlight the concept of powerful, larger-than-life creatures that impact human existence. There's an undercurrent of mythology in Japan that deals with beings who manipulated nature and created structures that connect to the gods. What's the lesson here? The ancient Japanese understood that nature was not just to be tamed. It was a force that could be revered and feared. Moving into China, we encounter the legendary giant Pangu, who, according to creation myths, separated heaven and earth. As the story goes, Pangu held the sky above for thousands of years, and in doing so, created the mountains and rivers we see today. It's a stunning visual, a giant being whose physical form is intertwined with the very fabric of the earth. Was this just a creation myth, or is it a way to explain the extraordinary landscape of China? As you look at the geography, mountains, rivers, valleys, you can't help but think of Pangu's legacy echoing through the ages. What's remarkable about these myths is how they tie into real-world archaeological findings. For example, the megalithic structures scattered across various parts of Africa and Asia have often been attributed to these giant builders. Sites like the stone circles of Senegambia in West Africa and the mysterious dolmens in South Korea spark the imagination. Could these ancient peoples have believed that giants helped them, either literally or symbolically, in their construction efforts? It's a compelling idea that invites us to explore the lines between myth and reality. Archaeological evidence and counter-arguments on giants and the Nephilim. Let's tackle the big one, the claims of giant bones. If you dive into the annals of paleontology and archaeology, you'll find scattered tales of colossal skeletons unearthed across the globe. I mean, we've all heard stories about giant bones being discovered, only for them to mysteriously vanish. Some of these stories have stirred excitement, with people claiming to have found remains that could only belong to beings far larger than any human we know. But here's the kicker. Many of these claims have been scrutinized and debunked. Take the infamous 19th century claim of giant skeletons found in Wisconsin. It sent waves through the community, sparking interest in giants. But when researchers went back to investigate, they found nothing but exaggerations and hoaxes. Many of these so-called discoveries turned out to be misidentified Native American remains, or even outright fabrications. Skeptics have pointed out that while there are legitimate archaeological digs happening every day, sensational claims about giant skeletons often lack rigorous scientific backing. It's a fascinating case of how myths can be birthed from misunderstandings and, let's be real, sometimes a desire for sensationalism. Now, let's get into the fossil record. When it comes to the existence of giants, people often reference various fossil finds that supposedly indicate the presence of massive humanoids. But here's where it gets tricky. Paleontologists are meticulous, and for every claim of a giant skeleton, there are countless studies that meticulously analyze those finds and often find them lacking. Most fossil records we rely on show us a range of hominids. Yes, but not giants in the way folklore suggests. We've got Neanderthals, Homo erectus, and so on, but the notion of giant humans? That's a bit of a stretch. So, what do we make of these myths? Some tales of giants are derived from cultures' attempts to explain their world. Think of it this way. When faced with the incomprehensible forces of nature, humans often create larger-than-life figures to embody those powers. That's where we see giants springing from the earth in stories, often symbolizing strength or the natural world's unpredictable nature. But here's the critical thing. Understanding these stories as cultural artifacts doesn't mean we need to accept them as literal truth. Another point worth mentioning is the scientific method. In the world of archaeology, if you can't reproduce findings or provide concrete evidence, you're often left with just a tale. Many claims of giant skeletons were examined and found to be lacking critical evidence, like proper dating or reliable documentation. The scientific community, as rigorous as it is, demands proof that holds up under scrutiny. And so far, claims of giants don't tend to withstand that scrutiny. The crux of the matter is this. While legends and myths of giants are intriguing, They often don't align with the archaeological evidence we have today. We're not saying to dismiss these tales outright. Instead, we're looking at them through a critical lens. They reflect our past, our fears, and our attempts to grapple with the unknown. But the truth of human history is more.
If you enjoyed this video and want to uncover more hidden scriptures with us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got even more insightful content coming your way, and you won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.